Hello, distinguished Father Charles Murr.
Hello, distinguished doctor.
Thank you for joining us. It's January 8th, 2024, and once again there is a scandal and a controversy which is involving the teaching of our faith and involving Rome itself. It's time for us to look closely at this latest scandal, which broke actually this morning. And it has to do with a book that was published 25 years ago by the present prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, an Argentine friend of Pope Francis, whose name is Victor Fernandez. He's a cardinal. He was just made a cardinal in September. It's now January. He's the one who authored the document in December, just before Christmas, about blessing of irregular couples. And now a group of priests in Argentina have discovered a copy of a book he wrote in 1998. And we've got that book in English translation now, and it's just been released about 2 hours ago. Hello, Richard in Cleveland. Good to see you. We're welcoming every one of our podcast guests. We've got people from all over the world. Killian Byrne, Father Byrne from Ireland. Welcome, Father. And a Marine from Oklahoma. And Father Murr. We talked about this, Pat Martin from Clinton, Louisiana. So we've got people spread, and we got someone, greetings from Colorado at the foot of Pikes Peak, Marcia. Thank you, Marcia, for joining us. Let's look at the cover of this book. Oh, greetings from Manila, the Philippines, from AAFF. 2 days ago, we had Epiphany on January 6th. Now we have the latest scandal in the Vatican. Let's have the cover of the book, if we may. Oh, well, this is another question of St. Paul caught up to the third heaven. We're going to be talking about mystical experience, but here's the cover. The cover of a 1998 book by Cardinal Victor Fernandez. He's 62 years old now, so he would have been 37, 25 years ago when he produced this book. So he was in his late 30s, relatively young man, and he called it Mystical Passion, Spirituality and Sensuality. So here's the question. He's conflating the mystical, the contact with God, with the carnal, with the contact of sexual pleasure. And this book was actually unavailable for many years. People had heard about it. Some priests in Argentina finally found a copy. We believe that the cover images of Apollo and Daphne, Apollo, the Greek god, who in some ways was the pagan equivalent of Christ, in the sense of being the sun god, the god who brings reason and light into the world, in some sense the alternative to the Logos. So it's significant that Apollo and Daphne are placed with a few garments around their private parts on the cover of this book by Victor Manuel Fernandez, who is now the prefect of the highest doctrinal office in the church. Father Murr, do you have a beginning comment?
After reading this, I read the chapters that I forwarded to you, Robert. Chapters 7, 8, 9. They're very short chapters. After reading that, I don't shock easily, and I'm not a prude. I really am not. I couldn't believe what I was reading. But you know, Robert, I've got to tell you, things make more sense to me today than they ever did before, because I finally have a handle on modernism. I really have a grip on it now. Even when I was studying in Rome in the 1970s, it seemed as if modernism was passé. That was something that we're finished with. That we're on to a new level, a new plateau of understanding or something. Not at all. right now, what we're living right now, I'm telling you, is the epitome of modernism. This is what exactly what Pope Pius X talked about, explained, went into detail about. It's happened. So we're here now. And this book, at least these chapters, I have not read the whole book. You'll forgive me for saying so, but I will not read the whole book. It was bad enough having to read these 3 chapters. I found them repugnant. But this is the epitome of modernism. It's not psychology. It's not philosophy. It's not theology. It's not biology. It's not science. It's a conglomeration of everything. And Robert, almost without God, as an explanation, trying to get to an explanation of what is happiness, what is fulfillment, what this experience of the mystical is. It's really a hodgepodge. And all I can compare it to is many years ago when I was in Rome, we had a brilliant philosopher. He had a doctorate in philosophy and a doctorate in theology. He was a brilliant man, Father DeVos. And I asked him, I said, after class, he was one of those professors who would stick around afterwards and talk. I mean, we would go into the cafe of the university and have long conversations of philosophy, of points of philosophy and theology. And I asked him one. I said, I'm 21 years old at the time. 21, I guess. I'm having a very difficult time understanding Teilhard de Chardin. And he smiled. He smiled and he said, "What do you mean you're having a hard time?" I said, "Well, I don't understand him." And he looked at me and said, "And what is there to understand?" I said, "Really?" He said, "Well, let me just tell you. I'm a philosopher. Teilhard de Chardin is not a philosopher. I'm a theologian. He is not a theologian. I'm a scientist. He is not a scientist." He said, I'm not a poet, but if I ever run into a good poet, I'll ask him what he thinks of his poetry, because that's it." And what he was trying to say is that the modernists, and Chardin was probably the king of them in the late 60s and early 70s. They're trying to put everything together to make sense almost without God, just by reason. And they're actually being unreasonable. This is what I find in Fernandez's book. It's a hodgepodge, but it's also, Robert, permit me to use the word, it's disturbing. I found it disturbing.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not a prude. I've read through a lot of things some things that are horrible that I had to read through because I had to. It's part of the job. This was disturbing.
Well, I think people may be wondering what really we are talking about. And we have to be clear, even though it's very difficult, because it's almost pornographic. What he is saying is that sexuality, sexual pleasure are somehow confluent with a mystical connection with God. So he's trying to this is a summary that was written to the release of the abstracts today. But just for people to understand what's happening here, we've got a head of the doctrine of the faith who has explored in great depth the question of sexual pleasure and to what extent it's similar to or connected with mystical experience of God. So this is the bringing of the supernatural down into the natural and sort of consecrating it in a kind of almost ritualistic embrace of human sexual pleasure over against the traditional belief that the holiness of God, which draws us toward him, surpasses and separates us from all carnal things. And we'll be discussing this question. Of course, it has become commonplace in the last 50 or 75 years for people to speak about Catholics who keep the traditional faith as being neurotic, of being against all ordinary human pleasure. But this sexual revolution, this is part of the sexual revolution, this book, and the fact that it was almost hidden. Let's go back to that previous thing and read it together. But this is what the scandal is. I'll read it. A book written by Victor Manuel Tucho is his nickname, Fernandez, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith just for the past 6 months. He was made prefect back on the 1st of July in 2023. A protege of the reigning pontiff. This is important. He's very close to Pope Francis, so close that people say he's his ghost writer, even for the encyclical Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, back in 2014, when we started to have questions about to what extent there was a departure from our traditional teaching. And even some of his environmental encyclicals, it was believed that this man, Fernandez, had given a draft to the Pope that he could use to develop his encyclicals and put his own signature. So this man is very close to Pope Francis and deeply trusted by Pope Francis. This book has emerged from the mists of the past. Below you will find a post on some extracts from the work relating to male and female orgasm and mysticism. Here is his message. This was the introduction that went with the email that contained the selections from the book that has been sort of running around the internet for the past few hours. The title of the book, Mystical Passion, Spirituality and Sensuality, by Monsignor Victor Fernandez, 1998. There's the book. Let's go back to the text. El Tucho published this book in 1998, but dropped it off the face of the earth many years ago. However, some trustworthy people finally managed to obtain a copy, which was quickly studied and scanned. See the attachments. They were able to read the text and identify the most scandalous chapters, which were quickly translated into English, chapters 7, 8, and 9. Now, here's a quote from the book. And you were saying you were hesitant to speak about the book or to quote it, but we need just somehow for the record to get something of the content, or people will wonder what we're talking about. This is a quote from the book. But let's say more precisely that in mystical experience, God touches the most intimate center of love and pleasure, a center where it doesn't really matter whether we are male or female. And in that center, we are all receptive and live an experience in which we are not fully masters of ourselves. He's referring to a type of ecstasy that goes beyond human reason. For this reason, scientists usually say that the differences between men and women are experienced in the phase preceding orgasm, but not so much in the orgasm itself, where the differences between female and male are no longer so clear and seem to disappear. End quote.
Now, Robert, if I may, just at this point, this is the man responsible for the blessing, not blessing of individuals, not individuals, couples, not couples.
Yeah.
Irregular situations, irregular unions. And he's talking right now that there is no difference. He has no problem with saying that males and females are practically the same thing.
All right. And it's
very
pretty
important point to make.
There's a kind of, in this entire globalist sort of transgender agenda, there is a desire to annihilate gender, to annihilate the difference between male and female, to have the male bear a child or to have the female conceive a child. It's a type of madness which is increasing, and it's somehow woven into the thought of this book. And therefore, it raises a concern about the mind of the man now in charge of Catholic doctrine. Now, let's go back to Teresa of Avila, the interior castle. There is a profound, lasting, perennial tradition in the church that we can be in touch with or in communion with God as human beings, as fallible, as sinful. Somehow the grace of God can touch us. And this is the source of all of the mystical yearnings of pilgrims in this world, that we can draw close to what is eternal and what is holy. And this is considered going out of ourselves and going toward the transcendent God. And this is how Teresa of Avila describes this in her book, The Interior Castle. Quote, "Let us say that the union is like the joining of two wax candles to such an extent that the flame coming from them is but one, or that the wick, the flame, and the wax are all one. But afterward, one candle can be easily separated from the other, and there are two candles. The same holds for the wick. In the spiritual marriage, the union is like what we have when rain falls from the sky into a river or fount. All is water, for the rain that fell from heaven cannot be divided or separated from the water of the river. Or it is like what we have when a little stream enters the sea. There is no means of separating the two. Or like the bright light entering a room through two different windows. Although the streams of light are separate, when entering the room, they become one." So in our traditional belief, there's a union that can occur between a being who is almighty and all holy and transcendent, and a being who is, as all of us are, a mortal, limited, imperfect, and sinful being. And that our religious journey and our longing is to have that type of a union. This is an image in art of the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa of Avila by John Lorenzo Bernini, when the feeling of the Holy Spirit entering and overpowering her was captured by this marble of Bernini. So, next image. We have another. This is an angel is touching Isaiah's lips with a hot coal. Now, Isaiah was speaking ordinary words, and you and I are speaking ordinary words, but when the hot coal touched his lips, which actually you can see there's a fire moving up from the hand, that coal is burning and there's a flame of fire, and that's about to touch the lips, and it's a metaphor, but it's also a reality. What he then spoke was the prophetic words that included the words that had to do with the coming into the world of the Messiah. But his words were no longer his own words, but they were tinged with divinity, with holiness. And we have, therefore, in our tradition, a sense of ecstasy. And what the modernists have been doing, and what seems to have imbued this work of Fernandez, is a kind of humanism, a type of forgetfulness of the transcendence and holiness of God. Do you have any reflection on that?
Just on something that you mentioned before, that the modern world, after Hugh Hefner, has accused Catholics, especially of being neurotics, especially when it comes to sex. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Just stop and think. 35% of American adults today have sexually transmitted diseases.
Yeah.
35%. Who's neurotic? I mean, for goodness sake, we're living in a country, in a world, Western civilization, which is collapsing all around us, is overwhelmed by sexuality, sensuality. This is the whole thing. To have a theologian, if you will, or a philosopher, or a psychologist, whatever he wants to be, delve into all of this and try to find God without finding God, if I'm making any sense, because there is very little mention of God. The divine is, he talks about the divine, but scripture isn't taken into account. Theology, serious theology, is not taken into account. In one sentence, he dismisses Plato and all Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
In one sentence. No, forget that. That's what deranged everything was Plato. What? You've got to be kidding me. That's ridiculous. There isn't any real deep thought into this. And I'm sorry, I didn't find any. What I found is a man who's jumping into sensuality and sexuality as an explanation for, I don't know what his end is, what his goal is here.
Well,
the end of all of this, I don't get it.
Well, these are powerful drives and powerful emotions and powerful pleasures, but they actually drive us mad. Oh, Laurie, be sure to hit the thumbs up. Thank you, Laurie. But yeah, about 97% of the loves that we have in our lives are non-sexual. It's like if you have a son or a daughter and you hold the baby in your arms, you don't have a sexual feeling. You have absolute love and protection. And you look into the eyes and you see this new being, and you have it with your brothers and your sisters. Now, everything can be corrupted, and we're having all sorts of corruption and abuse of children, all sorts of corruption and breakdown in families, abuse of children in families. And the protection of the 97% of love, which is non-sexual, which is brothers and sisters, it's friends. Friends, they want to sexualize, in a sense, everything, because they want more of this experience of pleasure, but they don't seem to understand that if they focus on it to the exclusion of everything else, they'll drive themselves mad, like the orgiastic rites of the ancient world, and then they will lead to diseases and to individualistic and narcissistic obsessions, and finally addictions. The whole wisdom of our tradition told us to treat this with great care and put it inside of a kind of very careful ritual of marriage and commitment and union and interpersonal love. And if you didn't do that, you would end up with a society that was filled with tragedy. So we're not, as Catholics, against human love and human life. What we discover is that if we're not taking as much care as our forefathers took, we'll end up with misery on all sides.
You also have in his writings more than a tendency, it's his way of separating sexuality from love. Yeah. They're separated. And this is a major mistake, You can't do that. If you do that, you end up with the philosophy of Hefner. You end up with pornography. You end up with sensuality for sensuality's sake. If you divorce it from love. And as a matter of fact, if you just follow that, the sensuality part, looking for ecstasy and looking for spiritual union with God is what he's proposing anyway. You can't have it, because you can't have that without love. It's actually you should be examining the love part much more than the sensuality.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
So what we're really concerned about here is a error, a blasphemy that makes it impossible to have access to the highest, most beautiful, and purest things by venerating and idealizing a type of sexual pleasure which nobody is unaware of and everyone knows about, but he's kind of deifying it. And this somehow,
That's a good term for it, Robert. Yes. That's about the closest he comes to in what I've read, which are those rather shocking chapters. It's the closest he comes to the idea of God is the deification of sensuality.
all right, so we will come back to this. I don't know how much more we can say right now. What we can summarize as the situation is that Pope Francis has chosen an old friend to be the man in charge of the doctrinal gates of the Catholic Church in an age where sexuality and transgender and mutilation and abuse is rampant. And what we've now discovered that this man has written a book which is completely alien to the main lines of the mystical tradition of the Catholic faith and attempts to merge sexual pleasure into a type of religious deification of the carnal. It's not the first time this has happened, but I think it's the first time that in the office of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, someone has arrived here with this type of literary baggage in his background. I can't imagine finding this in the writings of Pope Benedict, who was for 24 years.
Never.
And Pope Benedict was always saying and praising the wonder of love, and the wonder of love that becomes fruitful in marriage and fruitful in having children. And these are, in the ordinary course of events, the greatest joys of human life. But our entire society, by refocusing our attention in a more humanistic and carnal direction, is misleading us and leading us into misery. And that is why relationship after relationship is broken. Nothing lasts. People don't get married for a lifetime, but for a month or two. And there's very few children in many of these relationships, but they're using every means possible to generate these children in test tubes or in rented wombs. So,
Robert, if I may also, we have another problem here. All of the modernism is the conglomeration of all these things. It is the synthesis of all heresies. Pope Pius X took a long time explaining all of this. We are now listening. We're now living in it. This is the epitome of it right now.
yeah.
And it's also it's also a lie. It's a lie. What is being said. We also have this. The church is supposed to be, one of the signs of the church is that it's supposed to be against the philosophy of the world. Our church is no longer against the philosophy of the world. Recently, our church is trying to get ahead of the world.
Yeah.
In the world's direction and saying we get it. We're over here. We're more advanced. No, that's not what it's about. We're supposed to be proclaiming Jesus Christ and him crucified. We're supposed to be showing a different way to the world, not agreeing with the world, especially when the world is wrong. And this is exactly what's happening. Now, let me say this too. Even having written this, having written Amor Laetitia, having written this last thing on irregular couples and blessings of individuals versus couples, all of that. There is a way for this man to reestablish himself, to get back on track. All he would have to say is, this is wrong. I wrote it when I was young and stupid. It's wrong. I'm sorry. I'm ashamed of it. This is not theology. This is not it. But that's not going to happen. Mark my words, that's not going to happen. They'll double down on this as being something marvelous. This is so wrong from so many different points of view. I don't know where to begin. And to think, again, here, Robert, when I was ordained a priest, before ordination, my archbishop and I had a long talk. He did with every priest, every about to be priest. And he asked me, well, you know, we've asked this one about you, that one about you, that where you studied. We've gotten reports and everything else. Everything is fine. Checks out. Do you have any reason for which you could not be ordained a priest? Right? We talked out a couple of things that I was serious and I was quite honest. Fine. He ordained me a priest, so they couldn't have been all that horrible, right? When a man is becoming a bishop, being made a bishop, he is asked by the Holy See and by the Vatican nuncio, is there a reason for which you could not accept this consecration? When a man is being elected pope, before the vote comes in, he's elected pope, they ask him, is there a reason for which you would reject the election? You, Robert, when you got married, you sat before a priest, and the priest asked you, is there any reason for which you, Robert, cannot marry this woman, or this woman marry Robert? All right? Somebody should have asked him about all of this. This is serious stuff. I mean, it's disturbing. It is, to me, I'm sorry, but it's just unbelievable that we have somebody in charge of the doctrine of faith who believes this stuff. And there are other terms I could use for it, but it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Also, you notice that in all of this, Robert, I think I've already said this, but I'm going to say it again. He makes no real distinction between men and women. They're the same. They're the same. And this, as you correctly bring out, this runs right into transgenderism. We're wallowing in this today. There's something very wrong here, and there's something very disturbing. It has to be addressed. It has to be addressed.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that we are not to be conformed to this world. And Jesus also said, my kingdom is not of this world. And therefore, when you have teaching, or even if this was a book 25 years ago that was sort of a youthful work, which makes everything that is in the world and of the world a kind of central concern, and we've lost somehow the salt that gave the teaching of the church its Christocentric savor, its vision of something that transcends the things of this world, that transcends this human life, transcends death itself. Man, I've often thought of this phrase, which someone mentioned years ago to me. Man is not himself unless he transcends himself.
Yes.
And what he's having us do is dive back in really to the emotional and pleasurable aspects of sexuality in this book that he once wrote. And he had another book about the art of the kiss. These are things which are not unique to him, but the fact that he's the leading officer of the doctrine of the church, and that's in the hands of someone who continually points us to the things of this world, is a profound concern, as if we're losing the faith itself.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And as let me reiterate, there's a way out of this. And the way out of it is to stand before the world and say, what I wrote is wrong. I no longer hold those views. They're erroneous. They do not conform with my Catholic faith. I reject them.
Yeah.
That's what you can do. Let me just give you an example. And I was debating whether to use this or not because it's more awfully personal. The first book that I wrote a book. I thought it was great because it was telling a true story. Well, it turns out that many people who read that book were scandalized by some of the language I used and some of the scenes that were. And what I was doing was recounting real situations, absolutely true situations. Right? I pulled the book. I took it out of circulation, and when I could, I apologized to those people who found it offensive. Right? Because my intention is not to scandalize people. That's not the idea.
Yeah.
But it was my first novel. I could have written it differently. I probably could have. I certainly could have. But rather than defend it, I'm not in the business of scandalizing people. That's not why I'm a priest, to scandalize. I took it off out of publication.
Well,
You admit a mistake and you carry on. That's all that would have to be done here. And I'm telling you, I do, and I would be elated to hear that. I would be very happy for him because you know what, Robert? That would also be very, very beneficial to the salvation of his soul. I mean that with all charity.
Well, sir, I agree with everything you've just said. I'm admiring you for having taken your book back. Perhaps the fact that this book was hard to find meant that he had kind of abandoned it himself. I do remember an interesting anecdote. I visited Regensburg about 10 years ago, and I met there with Georg Ratzinger, who was the Pope's brother, Monsignor, who lived in Regensburg, and visited in Pentling, a suburb of Regensburg, the house that Joseph Ratzinger had prepared when he thought that after John Paul passed away, that he would also leave the Vatican and go back to Germany and live and maybe do some writing and live out the last years of his life. And I walked up the stairs to a large study with books on each end and a large desk in the middle. And I thought, oh, there's a book open here on the desk. I wonder what book Joseph Ratzinger left open on his desk. And it was a book by St. Augustine, and it was entitled Retractationes, which are his retractions, going through everything he had written and saying, now, as an old man, as I think it through, I take back something I said here, I phrase it differently. And this is something that we regret that maybe we're not receiving even from Pope Francis and from his doctrinal official Fernandez. They could inspire us with a type of respect if they were to say, in our desire to help people, we wanted to draw close to people in their ordinary feelings, but in the midst of a global effort of unisex and of transgender, to emphasize the types of things in the blessings, and even that's what emerged now in this book, without any retractation, without any correction, without anything saying, we thought maybe we would be doing something loving and helpful, but now as we think it over, we realize we fell into a mistake. That is very rarely come out. All the efforts in the past years to try to get some type of correction of some exaggeration or some confusion have not succeeded. And this book seems to be one more example. We'll see if there's any after. I think all over the world now, people are discussing this, and some people will be writing about it. It will appear in the press. And I think we'll come back to it on Wednesday, because we just heard about it a couple of hours ago. Maggie's Ace. Hello, Father Murr. Here just to hear your cheerful voice.
Not so cheerful, Maggie, today. I wish it were more cheerful. with a happier theme to discuss, but I'm being as cheerful as I possibly can.
Oh,
Greetings from Mexico City, Susana Martin. Very good.
Bertrand Lundy, hello from France, Father Lundy. And Marie Gillen, good afternoon, Robert and Father from Scotland.
Anne-Marie Gillen, I went to school with an Anne-Marie Gillen, but that couldn't be. She wasn't Scottish, unless she moved to Scotland.
Chris H., greetings from Chessington, UK. Eric T., unemployed homeless man from Denver. Eric, I appreciate you listening. Try to do ever better on this program. And I hope you find, if you're looking for work, I hope you find it and that it'll be rewarding for you and that you find a home.
I ditto that, Eric. I ditto that.
All right.
I respectfully disagree with Father. All right. Rejecting Plato is permissible. Yes, Eric, it is permissible, but not in one sentence. You have to take the thousands of different things that Plato said, which are wrong and which are right, not all of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not what I'm trying to say with this. It's not seriously written. You just don't do that.
Yeah.
You just don't do that. Anyway.
Well, we have some symbols there which I do not actually understand. I can't read them. But bonjour from Paris, Father Murr.
Bonjour, ma'am.
Viva Cristo Rey. Oh, look, we are going to have a pilgrimage together in Spain in just over 2 months' time. And we have 2 or 3 slots still open. We're going to visit southern Spain, and actually where you are now, you have this, we see
Yes.
a little piece of your property and the beautiful countryside of southern Spain, and you're going to give us a spiritual retreat during the last part of
I'm going to do my best, Robert. I'm going to do my best.
All right.
I enjoy giving retreats. People are always interesting to meet, and their opinions are interesting also. And I certainly allow for those opinions to be shared during retreats. But I think I've got a pretty good program too to give. A lot of it based on St. Ignatius and an awful lot on Fulton J. Sheen, who I absolutely love. I absolutely love Sheen.
And
what a great communicator.
Well, what is a retreat, Father, just to summarize?
Pardon me?
What is a retreat?
What is a retreat? A retreat is, just as the word says, to get away from the world. To get away from the world and come into a place of peace. Separate. Leave. What was it? Grab your, what is it? It was an old 20s song. Grab your hat and grab your coat, leave your troubles at the doorstep, right? Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. That's it. A retreat is you leave your troubles at the entrance, and you come in to a place of peace and of goodness, of joy, of fellowship, and of reflection and of prayer, and kind of find yourself again. People in the olden days, Robert. I told you this, my mother and father every single year made a retreat, a week-long retreat with the Jesuit fathers. 1 week my father would go, a couple of weeks later my mother would go. And it was a time that as they grew older, every year they took a week off to look at life. That's exactly what a retreat is. And and if you will, just put it simply, it's to recharge your batteries, recharge your spiritual batteries. That's really the way I would put it.
Well, thank you, Father Murr. We have one question from Dr. Lizette D'Souza. Father Murr, do you offer the Tridentine Mass?
Ed in tribo ad altare Dei ad Deum qualifica ad juventutem meam adjutorium nostrum in nomine Domini qui fece caelum et terram. I think I've answered that for you. Haven't I, Doctor? Yes, I do.
All right. So, Dr. Lizette, yes. I would appreciate anybody liking this video, sharing it, telling other people that we exist. And we're going to come back on Wednesday and go even more deeply into this question. We will by then have the entire copy of this book that was released in Buenos Aires, Argentina, just about 2 or 3 hours ago. And we talked about having this program and talking almost as breaking news about the prefect of the Vatican dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, having a book that's much about sexual pleasure from 25 years ago, and sort of explaining how that is, in his view, mystically pleasing to God. And we're going to try to read more of what he has to say and consider whether in some way the doctrinal offices of the church are in danger of being worldly and of losing our way, which was the straight and narrow way taught to us by Jesus and exemplified in his passion and death. And the 2,000 years of our history now seem to be facing an enormous crisis, even at the very top levels of our church. So, Father Murray,
They seem to be doing that, Robert, only because they are. That's exactly right.
So we have to redouble our efforts, and we'll use our retreat in March and these programs. Next live stream this Wednesday, January 10th. And thank you for coming on, Father Murr. I hope you are well. And
Robert, it's always good getting together with you. I think we don't have all of the answers to all of the problems in the world, but we've got some pretty good ones, and I think we've got the right attitude to be looking at them. At least we're two positive people looking at situations and trying to make the best of everything, and giving people. There's a lot of reason to be hopeful. Here's something else too that I'd like to say, and I've said it 1,000 times. Let me say it again. Everything that's happening today, the chaos in which the church finds itself, I'm not concerning myself with the chaos the world is in, because the world did that itself to the world. That's its spirit. It can take care of itself, or it can't take care of itself. But the reason that the church is in the state that it's in right now of confusion is because it is going to be answered. It is going to be clarified. It is going to be defined. All of these questions that are bothering so many people right now, in the future, I pray that it's the near future, are going to receive answers. This is the way the church has been going for 2,000 years. A set of problems arises, they're addressed, right? We just happen to be we're like the man on the flying trapeze who let go of one trapeze and he hasn't grabbed the other one yet. It's in midair. But you're going right you're going in the right direction, right?
There's apparently a person in Ontario, Canada. Thank you, Dr. Moynihan and Father Murr, for accompanying us in reason. God bless. So thank you for writing that. There's an old Latin phrase, many have forgotten it now, but it's oremus pro invicem. Let us pray for one another. Oremus pro invicem. Let us pray for one another, that we can go forward and continue on our journey, our pilgrimage, which brings us eventually to eternity.
Won't it be great, Robert, one day when we behold God face to face, to understand everything as God knows it and is willing to share it with us?
Yes.
It's wonderful. One of the things that so many of the people from the Middle Ages, especially, but also the beginning of the church, referred to hell. They referred to hell as a place of confusion. And in the what is the famous Dies Irae? One of the lines of the Dies Irae for the Mass for the Dead is "Non confundur me in aeternum." Don't
Yeah.
confound me in eternity. Don't.
Yeah.
That's the definition of hell, being in confusion. Heaven
Yeah.
has got to be the contrary of that.
Yeah.
Understanding, peace, knowledge,
Yeah.
clarity.
The logo.
Beautiful.
That,
Yes, the logo. Exactly.
all in
Exactly.
all. Yeah. Dies Dei Irae of wrath.
Yeah.
The day of wrath. And the statement somewhere, St. Paul says, eye has not seen nor hath
No ear has nor ear heard. Yes.
what God has stored up for those who love him. In other words, it's surpassing everything we could imagine through our senses and in our minds. It's far different and far more that awaits us than we can ever imagine.
I look forward to it, Robert, and I look forward to you being there with me. Now, if you get there before I do, well, not before I do, when you get there, check to see that I'm there. And if not, there's got to be a complaint department.
Absolutely.
I will put in one.
So let's work together and pray together. All the best to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you on Wednesday in 2 days' time.
Join us for a unique pilgrimage, a Lenten retreat with Father Murr in March 2024. Pilgrimage through southern Spain, a beautiful land where the Catholic Church's rich 2,000-year history comes alive during Lent. And partake in a Lenten retreat led by Father Charles Murr, our friend. We will pilgrimage to several towns in the Andalusia region of southern Spain. The people, the history, and the traditions of these towns will give richness, beauty, and context to the talks of our retreat. Experience this once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage and Lenten retreat and grow closer to Christ as we prepare our hearts for the joy of the risen Christ on Easter morning.